Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 108th New Social Environment. I'm Lewis, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation between Tony Oursler and Thyrza Nichols Goodeve. We're also thrilled to have the poet Meme Bersenbrugge here, who will read to close today's program. And now to introduce today's host. Thyrza Nichols Goodeve is a writer, editor, artist, and interviewer. She currently teaches several graduate programs at SVA and is spending her time in quarantine learning to embroider. From 2017 to 2019, she was the senior art editor at The Rail, and she is now our editor at large. Thyrza, over to you.
Thank you, Lewis, and it's so great to be back. I have to thank Lewis and Carol and Nick and the staff here, as usual, is just amazing. And Jack, Tony, your assistant, helped us so much too.
Excellent.
So it's wonderful to be, I don't need to, I'm not going to read an introduction to Tony. I think people know, but I just want to say that for me, it's such a pleasure because you really are the sort of seer kind of prophet of our paranoid, hysterical, psychotic media landscape that we're not all that happy that we're in, but you've been talking about it for since you were younger, and we come from the same generation. So we can start the PowerPoint. Tony and I were both born in 1957, right? So yeah, and so that year is very important for Sputnik, right? So we have the Cold War. And it's also when the book, The Three Faces of Eve, was published.
Sputnik was, the first encroachment, kind of permanent encroachment on the heavens, so to speak, which really changed a lot of people's perspectives and sort of brought a kind of Cold War paranoia to the situation. What you were saying about three faces.
Yeah, and so the three phases, these are just to sort of set up a note ahead of time. We have tons of video, and so at times I'm going to be interrupting to get us going forward. So anyway, so Three Faces of Eve is 1957. Later we'll see how multiple personality disorder is important to both Tony and myself, but just wanted to note that. Okay, and then this is where I really feel like we bond, in the TV shows that he and I were brought up on. So you can start talking about those.
Great. Well, there's the kind of the definition of our generation is that we grew up watching television more than we did anything else but sleep. And so I think that kind of puts us in a very special contemporary moment, because I think that arc is pretty much continued with subsequent generations and technologies and so forth. But the idea that we sort of sat there in front of the television, and it was just sort of the beginning of, there's a kind of interesting kind of psyop, to have these kind of memes and kind of cultural flow coming into the home in a very special way, which also kind of provoked a sort of hypnotic cone of vision to the television, and
so we have here Lost in Space, My Favorite Martian. Then the next, we have a number of slides. The next slide, please. Outer Limits, of course. Twilight Zone, and look, there's the eyeball that becomes very important to you later.
Yeah, Twilight Zone, that's the existential kind of beat pop sci-fi. I love that program, was amazing and important.
So, we're watching these at like between, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So these are what are really sort of forming our brains. Clutch Cargo,
yeah. Some of the animation in there, I've been told, kind of affected me, although I'm not really sure how, but if people are students of early television, this kind of very rudimentary animations, and the way that willing suspension of disbelief is kind of provoked in the viewer is evident in a lot of this stuff, which sort of, you know, relies on the hypnotic technology, but also if you look at it today, it just kind of falls apart structurally. And so I really love that, you know, I feel like that and the Catholic upbringing kind of helped me, you know, understand perception and the flow of kind of contemporary mythologies and belief systems and what we used to call urban myths and so forth. But also this primary idea of willing suspension of disbelief, that the viewer really put themselves in this hypnotic state, but also was very happy to create, animate, you know, these fantasies out of things that if you kind of step back and analyzed it, very hard to kind of fall into, you know.
Right. Clutch Cargo was also really bad animation. It just used the mouth.
Yeah.
So when we get to your videos in the 70s.
Like Samuel Beckett, yeah, in a way, yeah. And in a pop version, but
yeah, so next slide, please. For more of the TV, yeah. So the Munsters, of course, and then we can keep going.
Beautiful goth kind of like the idea of these monsters kind of populate your living room in a wonderful way, and Bewitched, one of the fantastic kind of early, almost occult TV shows.
Yep. And then I think the next, I Dream of Jeannie, right? She comes out of a genie bottle and into his home. And then the last slide of the TV shows is kind of my favorite.
Oh, great. What do you think? I mean, this idea of a kind of spiritualism connected to Ford Motor Company or something, kind of imbuing technology with spirits and otherworldly nature, you know, it kind of connects to the influencing machine and techno psychosis.
Completely. Again, for those who don't know, he sits in the car to talk to his mother because his mother is reincarnated as the car. Okay, so that's sort of the psychic background.
Yeah, hard to believe, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so that's, next slide, please. Yeah, so here's your brothers and sisters and you. Tony is in the middle.
Yeah, my wonderful family. In my hometown, small little town up on the Hudson, which was a kind of wonderful place to grow up just outside of Manhattan. And, you know, that's all my brothers, 5 brothers and sisters with my parents there. And you can kind of date this with, as you mentioned before, the paisley shirt and my afro there, you know, and I'm about to go to Cal Arts right around that time, you know, or maybe I was even at Cal Arts, I'm not quite sure. So but Nyack was a great town, and is a great town, and they have the Edward Hopper House, which I have a piece up right now. There's a little Edward Hopper House museum there, and you know, Hopper was from there, Joseph Cornell, and Thomas Wilfred, one of my favorite proto media artists, you know. If you don't know Wilfred, you got to look him up.
Did you know who Cornell was when you were growing up?
Oh yeah, sure. I knew who he was and knew where his house was, and we used to, you know, friends of mine broke into Edward Hopper's house and like stole a bed out of it, and it eventually got returned, but you know, it was kind of abandoned at that point. But, you know, when I was a little kid, I have this kind of fantasy, you know, Pascal Rousseau and I have been working on this crazy project in Nantes, France, which has to do with the history of hypnotism. And, you know, I'm kind of convinced in a circuitous way that I met Thomas Wilfred when I was just a little kid, because he used to open his studio up in Nyack and invite people to come in and see his light shows. You know, he did these wonderful moving light shows that had a duration of up to 7 years without changing. And so I don't really know if it happened, but I kind of imagine my mom taking me there in the station wagon, you know, and just checking it out. So I'm going to go into hypnosis and figure that out, you know.
Well, and speaking of your parents, next slide. I don't know how many of you know this, but both Tony's father, who is on the left, and I know it looks like he's in a still from a TV show from the 60s. Father on the left, and his grandparents, and I'll let him talk about them. They're very storied people.
So you see my parents, Fulton and Noel, and that's, I don't know, this was in 2004. My mom's still with us, thank goodness, and my dad's gone these days. But we, you know, come from a kind of writing and film family, mostly writing, and the black and white photos there are the Fulton Senior, Fulton #1, and then Grace Perkins, his partner and wife, who were both editors, writers, wrote many books, playwrights and screenplays and so forth. My grandfather had his first bite of the Big Apple with a play called The Spider on Broadway, which involved kind of breaking down the fourth wall and involved spiritualism and magicians and stuff. And he was a magician himself. And my grandmother wrote kind of pre-code racy stories and was a kind of wonderful.
Next slide while he talks about this. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of her books, Night Nurse, which I kind of quote in the Imponderable film and installation, was something that you can see on YouTube, right, Thyrza?
Yes, I saw it the other night. Yeah, go watch it.
And you'll think, well, it says Dora Macy there, but you know, both of my grandparents used a lot of different pseudonyms. Dora Macy, Grace Perkins, and Fulton Oursler was Anthony Abbott, and people like that, Samurai Furkel, and so they like to play around with the names and so forth. But her movie became, her book became a movie, and
Barbara Stanwyck.
Yeah, wonderful movie. And so it's a kind of pre-code, which is kind of interesting, you know, when you think about women got the vote in 23, something like that. And so, you know, this kind of overlapping of, you know, kind of salience and also tension there, you know, in feminism. And I like to think of her as a kind of proto-feminist.
Definitely. Okay, we'll keep going because we'll talk about them again later when we get to them. Okay, finally you're at Cal Arts. This is around the late 70s?
That's the mid, 76 or 77 there, and that's John, there you can, second from, John Miller's on the one end, the tallest end there, because I think I have it mirrored on my phone here. And then there's me looking very hammy, and then Mike Kelly and Bill Stovall and John Arnheim over there. And so those were one iteration of the Poetics. And, you know, I've been working on a lot of kind of projects out of the Poetics, most memorably, probably we'll go into it later. But anyway, the project at Cal Arts there was a kind of open-ended experimental performance, music, and rock band in a way, and a kind of proto-punk.
And you and Mike, met there and then started a very long career of collaborating. And it was a real zeitgeist moment. And with John Bell, sorry.
And John Miller there, and you know, so a great group of people. Sue Williams was there, and yeah, a lot of great people. And you know, I've been recently trying to work with the school. It has its 50th anniversary, and we're putting out a series over 5 years with Lisa Iverian Jones. We're publishing 50 editions to support scholarships for students. So, you know, kids can go there, study art, and go through that ritual of, you know, becoming, which happens at art school. And so if people are interested in those editions, you can go on. They're called 50 and 50 in 50, and you can find it on the internet, CalArts edition. John Baldessari, tall Big John, as we used to call him there, pictured at my studio at one point, was, you know, very influential on me, and we're friends forever and ever. And, you know, he helped me quite a bit kind of transition from painter, which I kind of arrived at CalArts being obsessed with painting, and transitioning into, you know, working with the old camcorders, as they were called back then. And of course, John, being a legendary video artist, you know, was quite keen to help me out with that. And so he is an important figure.
We can jump, okay, so quickly we're going to jump to a couple of slides of the poetics, and then we'll look at some videos. But yeah, here are the, and maybe just give it, so the poetics was a rock band and a performance group.
Yeah, we did soundtracks, radio shows, dances, choreography, and performances. And there's an image of our first outing there. You can see me in white, singing away. I was the singer, Mike was the drummer, and Mitchell Syrup was in the band. Jim Shaw was a kind of honorary member, and and John Miller, of course, and a lot of cast of characters cycling through. But we had this, you know, kind of idea. We even did like kind of comedy shows and all sorts of things. You know, we did a radio show with Doug Hubler, and that photo is actually taken by Darcy Hubler, Doug Hubler's daughter. And the other photo of the close-up of me there, that's shot by Jim Shaw. And below there is, I'm honored to have this, the Poetics Project, which was made for the, you know, it was a kind of remining our history, and made for the 1997 documentary with Katrine David, and then was bought by Christine Van Asch and brought into the Pompidou Center, and is now, if you find your way to Paris after COVID or whatever, or you're in Paris right now, you can go to the Pompidou and see the Poetics installation, which, you know, in '97, we kind of went back and remastered the records, there were no records, remastered the tapes and put out a record for the first time, and went into the notebook. You know, we kept this notebook with all the lyrics and designs for things, and went back, and Mike and I both went and kind of divided up the task of making a lot of the designs that were represented in the notebook. So like 20 some years later, and what you see is the result of that. And there was also a kind of didactic information quality to it, because we did quite a few interviews for the installation with an old friend who helped us out, David West, a great artist. And we interviewed, you know, wonderful people, Laurie Anderson, who had been our teacher actually at CalArts, Lydia Lunch, you know, David Byrne. And so we kind of, Alan Vega, Glenn Branca, and so on, Kim and Thurston, and they're projected also in the installation. And so the idea was really to kind of look at this great nexus that happens, and I imagine it's happening today with people, where there's a kind of, where art sort of drops off from this classic notion of something on the wall and turns into something else. And one of the salient aspects of that is the transition to sound and to music and so forth. And a lot of the bands that you hear today, you might or might not know it, were started out as artists and stuff. So this idea of the synesthetic moment that can happen at art school, and the politics of that, and it's something dear to my heart, you know, in the sense that the energy, the creative energy, the DIY kind of aspect of conceptual art kind of fueled a lot of that, you know, and right before conceptual art. So anyway.
Right. And also, yeah, and we'll get to your work with Bowie, because Bowie came out of that himself, but in the British context. So the next slide is Tony's chart of the worst band in history to the best?
Yeah, so one of the things we used to always just say, you know, our band just completely sucked. And that was the kind of great thing. It was like this sand in the oyster, you know, so we would try these things and, you know, it was frustrating, you know, and Mike would always say, you know, oh, yeah, we could be as big as that band or whatever, you know, but when we never had the equipment and so it was, we never had whatever, we just couldn't get it. And one thing led to the other and other things happened, but I just kind of went back and I would think like, oh yeah, like Bill Stobaugh, you know, like he went into Thelonious Monsters and then the Red Hot Chili Peppers kind of came out of that, you know, and then John Miller had been in the Coachmen, which then, you know, of course, that's Thurston and I think Lee came out of that and Sonic Youth kind of came from that. And then, you know, just looking at these connections and then working with Tony Conrad, who Mike and I had been in films with Tony, and then it's One Short Step, and he did soundtracks with me and so forth, at One Short Step to the Velvet Underground. So I had this idea, you know, there we were, the worst band in the world in the center. I should make a flow chart where it goes out, you know, 2 or 3 steps removed to the best bands out at the edge. And anyway, it's an ongoing project. John Miller's helping me update it, you know, because he's got some inside information.
Great. That's great. Okay. Next image is a still from early video, Life of Phyllis. But now, for those of you who haven't seen Tony's early videos, we're going to show you clips from some. They're just fantastic and they're so relevant now. So the first we're going to show is a clip from I'm Pretty Nice. You said it's mid-70s?
Yeah, it's one of the first tapes I made, and it's just a standalone piece. I used to make a bunch of shorts. You know, I kind of looked at, also looking at wonderful work of William Wegman, John Baldessari, and people like that, Vito Conchi, and you know.
The thing I just want to mention is that when I was watching these again, I kept thinking of the DIY perspective, right? I mean, Tony has this thing about basically that you pull from whatever's around you. You want to use the vernacular, and so we can show some of this and we can start talking about it. But they actually also work for COVID because they work on small screens and so,
yeah, well, you know, as soon as I got the video camera, I made the leap of this kind of 3-dimensional painted space and painting and looking at Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and George Méliès and kind of this early film work, which really comes out of stage design and so forth. But anyway, let's let it rip.
Yeah, could we see that one? Or at least if that one's not working, the next it would be from Evolve with Mike Kelly. I'm not sure if the, we have to go, yeah, okay, so this will be Evolve. A bit of it. We'll just watch maybe 30 seconds to a minute.
Yeah, this was my big sort of feature.
Just bear with us 1 second while they're loading. Sorry about that.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
So this is a section of about a 30-minute video, which was produced by the Cat Fund and Kathy Ray Hoffman back in 1983, 84. Yeah, let it rip. And shot in Buffalo at Media Study.
Maybe the videos aren't working.
Is it?
We're just loading a little bit.
All the personalities are puzzled by the Madonna's Immaculate Conception.
All male personalities gave birth through conception.
Children gave all puzzled Madonna's birth.
Becoming now gave mother by killing.
Through its holy is becoming, gave
Madonna male to its immaculate, all personalities.
Puzzled by, and now, conception, her is becoming.
Immaculate male to its mother and
Great. So I want to just get to the next one as well so that we can see that. It's a clip from Loner. So it's these painted sets, it's these wonderful sort of these performances that are obviously very slapstick. Loner was made, I think, what, in early 80s or mid 80s?
It's 1980, yeah.
1980. So,
And that other one was 83 or 4, 83 and 4, yeah. So.
and you graduated from Cal Arts in 79, right? So
yeah.
okay. So we can watch this. This is the bar scene. And this is a long video. This is just part of it.
Yeah. I mean, you just have to show a little bit, get the idea of how these things were.
Is there any sound? And there's a voiceover. I guess the sound is not up right now.
It's okay.
Oh, well.
People can find some of these on my website too, and Electronic Arts Intermix and the Video Data Bank are two, great institutions.
And they're just hilarious. And the narrative is hilarious, the voiceover. And this has got one of the great drunk scenes.
Yeah.
And there's a kitchen sequence before that I wanted to show, but maybe it's a bit too difficult. So, and we have other.
Just let it run in the corner if it.
Yeah, and we can also put the on the chat.
We'll post the links in the chat for everyone to see them.
That would be great. Because then coming out, and you made a lot of these, right? You made a lot of these early videos.
Well, yeah, it's sort of, as I mentioned, the painting sort of expanded into video space, and then the video space became more sculptural, and then then that became sort of installations. And so I think we have a clip of L7, L5, which was one of my first bigger installations, which was at the kitchen in 83, 84 in there. And had to do with kind of looking at the notion of science fiction as a cultural catalyst, that ranged from, sort of Star Wars, which kind of irritated me at the time.
Me too.
And thinking about other more serious science fiction written form, like Philip K. Dick and people like that who were.
But you kind of worked with. You did an interview with him for one of your.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. And and so then finally with this particular piece, I had a small budget from the kitchen, and I wanted to find people who, really met aliens and maybe went to space themselves. So I took an ad out in the Village Voice, which used to be a newspaper in the US and in New York. And I said in the back, like $25 an hour for firsthand encounters with aliens or UFOs and so forth. And some of the interviews ended up in the piece.
Wow. And this is early 80s, right? Yeah. So this is really at the cutting edge of that stuff.
It looks like they have the Loner up there just hanging out, which anyway, but should we continue on with L7, L5, see if they have some documentation?
Do you want me to try it again with audio?
Well, not this one. We'll move on to, we can have people look at that in chat. If you have the one that was at the kitchen called L7, L5.
Yeah, or it could, I noticed on the list it might be.
We'll get that one loaded right now.
Okay. All right. So, and that was, for me at that time, I was really Thyrza's going to know about this, that, the first generation of video artists were very enamored with the idea of the screen and the television as a kind of sculptural object. And I was not. I was very interested in just the power of the image. And this was, of course, there were really no projectors available to anybody at that time. So most of my installations had to do with kind of reflecting the image off the television set. And part of I evolved these sculptural objects that were sort of like video games or reflecting pools or, yeah, like this image here, which was the television reflected light up into the sculpture. And those are pieces of broken glass within the sculpture. So you kind of looked up at this house.
How big is that?
That's about 3 by 3 feet. And it's up, but it's up on it's like a 6-foot pedestal. So it has a kind of black mound on it. So it's probably like 9 feet high or something. And
then that's a video projected of drawing?
yeah, that's the woman, Gloria, who would just go by the name Gloria because she didn't want anybody to know who she was, who believed in UFOs and had encountered aliens in her bedroom on a nightly basis. And so she kind of drew out the scenarios where they took her blood and then they bewitched her in various different ways and vanished and so forth. And so.
Wow.
Should we give this a try real quick?
Yeah.
Sure.
Let's see. This is working here.
So there's a kind of flag, an inverted flag, cityscape, the TV, and then there's a kind of diagram of the room.
Gumby.
Yeah.
That's another one we forgot, Gumby.
Gumby is so good. So good, yeah.
Okay, so that's we get a good sense of what that's doing, right? So
Exactly.
again, we're still pretty early in your career. We're in the early mid 80s. And so now the next phase will be starting to get into the dummies and the effigies and the talking lights, which is what I think you're probably best known for. And so
Well,
I think, yeah, right? Or not?
Yeah, well, thanks for showing all that old stuff. It's nice.
I know. I want everybody to go, that stuff has to be re-brought back and everybody has to see it. We need to have a show because it's really, it's great stuff. And I wish we had more time and better video, but we're giving you weekend watching as
people can find it. They can find it out there. They can find it if they're interested.
It'll inspire some making too.
Good. That's my main thing.
That's what I'm hoping. Yeah.
I really want people to make things. Yeah. And
so in the late 80s, you started to work with dummies and effigies. You want to talk a little bit about that? We have the talking light.
Mm-hmm. Well, the talking light, it kind of came from this notion of, it's a little bit after the dummies, but I can talk about it a little bit. It connects to the video space and kind of interrogating that and thinking about, the power of sound and image together and what happens. And so I kind of designed this idea that, okay, you could have just simply a voice or a sound modulated by light, and that could have the same kind of power as cinematic space. And I was really looking at different ways to kind of climb into the viewer's head, because a lot of those early pieces kind of rely on this notion of self-auto-hypnosis and trance states that people get in front of television and the willing suspension of disbelief. And so I was always trying to push that, you know, like what happens, you know, how far can you go with that, with empathy, with art and engagement. And so I kind of came up with this very primitive system with the sound and light, and let's let it rip, you know. So
Yes, show it.
It happens when you are not thinking about it. On, off. On, off. On, off. On, off. On, off. On, off.
So this piece was basically installed
These are fantasies which become a reality.
in a street light. And I was thinking a lot about, you know, how people convert
It will
to
escalate.
thinking at that
It
time.
will blow up.
So people would
into
walk
light.
by it. I guess we can stop it for, yeah. So people would walk by the light.
Yeah, and there it is set in the landscape. And I love that it was kind of the smallest thing in the landscape, but also the biggest thing. So at night, the image, you know, or the light would sort of. And I love this documentation. This was up at Wanus in Sweden, I believe, and a temporary installation. And to me, it looks a lot like a Magritte, you know. So it's sort of inspired by when you pass a street light, you know, it kind of flickers and you're like, what's going on, you know? And actually, the God's honest truth is that my dad had told me when I was a kid that my grandfather believed that, you know, when the light blinked that he was getting some kind of message, you know. He didn't know what it was. And I think so all the years later, it kind of turned into this work one way or another. So,
Yeah.
but we can move on to the next.
Okay. So, okay, I think next comes the multiple personality stuff.
Yeah, this is where we share a great interest. And,
Yeah. So then Tony got into oh no, maybe we'll show this first though. Because this is, even if the timing is a little different. This is.
You want Getaway here?
Yeah. Let's show. This is one of the dummy. And this is Getaway, and this is what you really, and this is one of the funniest. I wanted to see it as a video, where the
Hey, fuck you! God damn it! Fuck you! Yeah, fuck it.
you made no other work than that. Bless your heart. It's just,
oh, thanks.
it's just
Well, you know, I had just been kind of fooling around with these when the little projectors came out, you know, the LCD projectors. I was teaching up at the great school, Mass College of Art in Massachusetts for some years, and having a great time there, teaching installation and video, and living with my old friend Joe Gibbons, the filmmaker and artist. And you know, I got a hold of these small projectors, and I'd been making these kind of scarecrow figures that had the different coding, you know, kind of cultural signals, businessman, you know, floral outfit, and playing around with gender assignment and so forth. And so, you know, but I couldn't get the face right. And then these projectors came along and boom, I immediately started working with this. And this piece, I believe it's in the Whitney Museum of Art's collection. And there's also another version of this called Guilty, which is just opening at the MFA in Chicago, like I think next week or something.
great.
But I had, you know, I worked with Tracy Leipold here, who's an old friend and a great performance artist and so forth. And she became my kind of alter ego, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I did some pieces with myself, and then And I like the idea of just kind of shifting my identity and working with her. And so we collaborated a lot. She would come to the studio and cry and for, you know, and change, you know, so I was really interested in kind of how empathy was passed on through technology. And Getaway, I had this idea of a very passive aggressive situation, and also, you know, friends had talked about how they're just harassed on the street by people, you know, whatever, sick cat calls and so forth. And so she had took on this kind of persona of that kind of role reversal, like this super passive aggressive situation. And I like the idea of an artwork that jumped out at the viewer, you know, and kind of challenged the viewer at the time. It was a lot of fun. Probably irritating to some people, but
no, it's great. They stand. Yeah, and here's an installation, because this is, you also talk about this around when you started to think about multiple personality disorder, which is now called dissociative disorder, but that you describe this as sort of one personality being split and fragmented through, right, in this installation?
Yeah, and this is something that, you know, we mentioned the Three Faces of Eve before, which I think the movie came out the year we were born, and the book had been out before, and so the idea somehow it was something that, you know, I mentioned before, there's kind of like following this kind of urban myths and so forth, and kind of cultural ideas as they passed around. And so it became obvious to me at one point that, you know, there was a long connection related to MPD, as it was called at one point, and kind of, and media in some way or another. And I was kind of trying to tease that out. So there was a kind of dark side to it in terms of trauma and so forth. But then on the other side, there was a sort of liberation aspect to it, you know, because the Three Faces of Eve, the book, is very much about, it's a liberation tale, kind of couched in a kind of pathology tale. And anyway, that installation, you know, I kind of took one character and worked on a diagonal across the installation space. And the idea was that the character sort of split off, you know, from a diminutive character to a also, you know, became, it had this kind of domestic situation. So there were kind of stuffed chairs and floral arrangements and curtains and so forth. And the character kind of transmutates throughout the installation. And then the viewer could sit in the space and work a figure and speak through a figure in a room at the very end. So it started with the small hysterical figure on one end and ended up where you could sit down and work a figure, which was preferably outside the museum. So you could kind of talk to people, and people would sit there and speak through the microphone and use a pan tilt unit to kind of harass people. And it was almost like, a lot of these were thought of also as kind of psychology tests for the viewer, you know, literally to set up a situation where, what would you say if you could say anything out to somebody on the street outside there and they didn't know where you were, and this kind of thing. And so I set that up with this kind of scarecrow figure outside that had a camera in it and a microphone, and you could sit inside and talk to people. So
it's amazing. Yeah. So so then here's this piece called multiple personality disorder. Okay, so the next slide is not Tony, but the coincidence of in 1989 I wrote an article. It's how I got to art writing on multiple personality disorder, lobotomy, and postmodernism. So this was 89. It was part of my dissertation, and so both of us were interested in this idea of these sort of fragmented subjects across. And yes, it was related to trauma. And in this article, I talk about a person named Trudy who actually started to develop into like hundreds of functions. She was no longer even a person, right? And she had just amazingly interesting stuff. And the thing I was going to say about the Three Faces of Eve, that woman was actually, her last name was Sizemore, and she actually had 20 personalities, and the book turned them into 3. So lots of stuff about popular culture, but certainly technology and the way it fragments, and think of it now, all the different, right? This is why.
Well, what is your take? I mean, my take was really, you know, they use the term switching
Yes.
in the situation. So of course the TV generation, and then starting with a very few channels, then going through cable where you had hundreds of channels and people switching, and this idea of, you know, the fact that when you're watching something, you sort of interject, and that you kind of pick up personality traits and so forth. And so there's a performative. So what was your take on it in the article?
Oh, it was, you know, I was in graduate school. It was the first thing I ever wrote. So I don't know, it was about ideas of memory, lobotomy I was interested in as a Cold War technology. And mine was interested in the kind of creative aspect of multiple personality. Not that it was to romanticize it, but it's like what you said. It comes out of trauma. And I was amazed at the idea that out of this kind of trauma where you're so fragmented that you have to dissociate and become something else, you could elaborate different kinds of personalities so that it could become a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of controversy about whether it's true or not or whatever, but that was I was sort of interested in that as a.
Yeah, the positive side of it was never really, because I think, you know, pathologies are always on the spectrum, you know, so we discover this because it's obviously happening. But on the other hand, it's happening everywhere throughout society to a smaller degree. And that's what's really interesting about it, is the notion that people would like to have the ability to change into anything they want.
And that's, yeah.
Wonderful thing.
That came with the internet, right? Yeah. So so we can get off this of mine and move on a little bit more. These are then these wonderful kind of creature sculptures that you were making in the early.
Yeah, I thought of them as like kind of pets and digital friends or pets. And, you know, you know, because I tended to kind of work with subject matter that was more difficult or scary for people. And I thought, well, you know, I just, Jacqueline Humphreys, my partner, and I just had a little kid and a little boy. And I was thinking, you know, I should try to make some more optimistic work because I'm feeling optimistic, and, you know, just challenge myself. We'll make something more humorous. And so I made these kind of things that were based on Ball's smiley face, really, and thinking about the smiley face, okay, bring that into a digital space, which these are from 2004, so it's early time with digital, but you can see there's like an early digital animation in there and techniques. And you know, each thing that I do, I kind of think about the sound and the language, if there is language, and the imagery and so forth, and kind of work it together. And I kind of was thinking at this time about like how people spoke to their beloved pets, children, and pillow talk, and how that's kind of private language and not really allowed publicly, or, you know, it's kind of agitates people or opens up something, you know, an embarrassment. So I kind of wrote these in that sense, that they, the performances are kind of wonderfully agitating to the viewer. And, you know, you can imagine private language. But these were shown at Metro Pictures Wonderful Gallery in 2005, and they're kind of like emojis or something. I think of them as caricatures and emojis.
Right.
And I also thought, like, what would happen when we evolved into a digital space? Very comically, like, well, we wouldn't need to smell anything because there's no smell in there, so they don't have noses. And then would you need to hear? No, you would just know what was being said because it's not sound, it's information or something. And so they became these pared down kind of evolution, devolution pieces.
Back to, yeah, the evolution. Fantastic. So next we jump into a phase of yours that started in the mid 90s when you met, I guess Bowie called you up to work with you. And I love this picture because it's the small little camera. But, and I think it's important, you know, going back to your roots that you talked about with the poetics and art school and the way that was so important to Bowie. So anyway, why don't you talk a bit about meeting him, and then we can show some of the 50th birthday anniversary.
Yeah, it was, you know, he was a kind of hero of mine, and my whole family's actually. You know, we used to just listen to when headphones were a real big deal, put the record on and listen to, you know, all his early records. My sister Thyrza had them, and, you know, everybody loved David. And then at some point, you know, I ran into him through a wonderful set of circumstances. I won't go in now, but he reached out to an assistant of mine at the time, a wonderful artist, Kristen Lucas, who was traveled to set up a show for me that David was in. And anyway, you know, David, he told Kristen that he wanted to meet me. And of course, this was back in the fax days, you know, so it wasn't easy to communicate.
Right.
Anyway, one thing led to another. And he was apparently a big fan of my work. So he came over, and it was just a thrill, because you talk about, you know, this kind of a person who could evolve and change, and multiple personality, and the positive side of it, and opening up, you know, gender issues and culture wars and so forth. And David was a real hero of mine. So it was kind of an incredible moment to work with him. And so we made a few things together, one of which was the stage set for his 50th birthday party, which was up at Madison Square Garden. And he used a bunch of tropes of mine, the double figure there you can see on the stage. And then I think we have a clip, which would be nice to show. Yeah, do you want to show that, or the other one? Yeah, Scary Monsters, just to give an idea of, you know, how he kind of wonderfully used a lot of my ideas, like the figure on the floor, in his performance. And
yeah, and yeah, here we go.
Yeah, here we go. That's the. I think this is with Frank Black.
And that's Bowie on the
yeah. Really, that was good, the way it stuttered there. You would have loved that. Excellent. But you know, it just was kind of like this crossover dream, you know, like artists always fantasize about. Get the artwork get out of our little world, you know, into a bigger one. So it was a real thrill to work with him. And
well, that's why I wanted to jump to the video that you made with him, I guess much later, of Where Are We Now?
Mm-hmm.
Which, if people haven't seen it, we're going to show part of it. It's so beautiful. And obviously it was made before Bowie left us. So watching it is even more, because it's a very nostalgic, very moody, very melancholy. And it's shot in Tony's studio. So it's really a wonderful kind of combination.
He loved my studio, I think, because it was so chaotic, you know. He used to just come over, and I think he just marveled at how much of it was in disarray. And so he had this idea for this piece, which was after his you know, he had a lot of health issues. For 10 years, he didn't put anything out. And we sort of kept in touch, saw each other just once in a while. And he just came along one day and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" You know, and I was like, "Nothing. What are you doing?" You know, like, and one thing led to another, and he wanted to very secretly make a video, which would just drop onto YouTube at midnight, the 2nd of midnight on his birthday, when his birthday began. And that's the way he would break his 10 years of silence.
Wow.
And it was such a great idea, and it's such an honor to work with him. And you know, he had basically the video made in his head, and you know, we just put it together in my studio here. And
So let's look at a bit of it if we can,
Okay.
and hope that we can hear it too.
Great. Yeah, I'm gonna play. Just give me a hand signal if you want me to turn the video, the volume down and keep it playing or something.
Okay.
Had to get the train from Potsdamer Platz. You never knew that I could do that, just walking the dead.
I guess that's probably as long as
That's probably enough. That's perfect.
You can see.
People can find that for sure. And that's such a great piece of music. And these are images, of course, where he lived with Iggy Pop and with Coco and Schwab, and that's his old flat there. And that's Jacqueline Humphreys there, looking about 12 years old somehow. And next to David as the double figure, his kind of double figure. And
yeah, he's much older. And as I said, if you watch it now that he's gone, it's so, you know, and why it's perfect for you, because it speaks to almost this idea of talking through technology after death, right? And then the whole thing he did with Black Star, and
yeah, that was super intense.
yeah, so that all of that comes together beautifully here. So I wish we could keep on it, but we're gonna have to jump now to the 2 biggest projects that you did in the past, and then we'll start. We'll have to wrap up, but because the next big project is influencing the Influence Machine, which he made in 2000. And it's one of my favorite projects of all time. So if we can start looking at images, it's outdoor, it's huge. And if you can set it up while they're trying to set it up.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, like what it's about.
Around 2000, I was very interested in kind of looking at, you know, where I was in time as a media artist and what could be done with public work. And you know, I was kind of fascinated by how there are all these incredible technologies that are in people's homes and lives and so forth, and they're people are disconnected from it in one way or another. And so I started writing this sort of history of technology that was a very simple timeline, and it kind of worked its way into this sort of isolating these moments where people were confused by technology and assigned it kind of mythic status, you know, as having an ability to kind of cross over into another realm. So like spirit photography came around at the time of the invention of photography right away with William Mumler right here in New York City. The telegraph, when it was invented, that's the first kind of telecommunications that was connected to spiritualism, but with the so-called spiritual telegraph and the rapping in upstate New York, and on like that. So that moment of openness that when technology is born and introduced, before it gets kind of economically codified, you know, and people say, oh, well, this is the way you got to watch TV, or this is the way movies are going to exist. You know, that there's this alternative tradition that we're all part of as artists, the way we use technology. And this was a piece, was a kind of celebration of that. And it was done through the Public Art Fund with my friend Tom Nichols, longtime collaborator and kind of philosopher, and James Lingwood at Art Angel in London. So it was the Public Art Fund, New York City, and we could just let it roll here, I guess.
And what's amazing, what people are seeing right now, because I went and saw it, this is all on smoke. And I can't tell you what, it's one of the most amazing experiences to be in the park with the smoke and having these projections on all the different layers. Very, 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 very virtual. And then the history in it is of, the history of television and the history of projection, because this is the other side of you that we can't get into, but that you are also a historian, a kind of loopy historian of all this, of these technologies. As you say, you've made this timeline, optical timeline. You're fascinated with the historical evolution of these things, not just the spectacle of it.
Well, I think when artists kind of, you know, they sometimes have to create their own histories to, you know, because of their weird interests. And I certainly wanted to dig around and look at some of this stuff, you know, who was Philo T. Farnsworth, the guy who invented television that nobody knows about, or Gaspar Robertson, who did the kind of phantasmagoria, which traveled around here and in Europe, which was a kind of pre-cinematic sort of installation kind of.
Didn't he use smoke too? Didn't he project on smoke?
That's where I got the idea. He, on a much smaller scale, but, you know, reading that technology kind of informed a lot of those installations from the late 90s and early aughts.
Wow.
So do we have time for a few more things, or?
Yes, because we need to speak about imponderable and fear of cloud.
Yeah, my friend Constance de Jong, I thought we had
we could have
a performance.
Working with her. We had with her before. Just because I think one of the threads is you're often collaborating with very amazing people, like from Philip Dick to Constance de Jong to Bowie to Mike Kelly to blah, blah, blah.
Exactly. And Constance, you know, I wanted to bring her up because also not only have we done many, many projects together, she was the first projected figure I made. And we did some performances where we kind of paired her as the storyteller with television, the mechanical electromagnetic storyteller at the Kitchen back in the day in '89. But I wanted to bring her up because she did a Brooklyn Rail project as well.
Oh.
And, you know, her retrospective, which is at Hunter, was postponed and will be coming up. So people can go over to see that if they check in with Hunter College, the Hunter College gallery space, and check out Constance, who's a
great
longtime collaborator. So I see you've got on Tear of the Cloud, which is a great connection to the Influence Machine, which, you know, comes out of my research with, you know, in the timeline. And this is another kind of research project that I kind of did having to do with the Hudson River. You know, I mentioned growing up in Nyack. So I always had this kind of love of what happened along the Hudson. And at a certain point, you know, I spoke with the new team at the Public Art Fund about doing a new project, and worked with Dan Palmer and the gang over there, and was able to work on the Upper West Side and project onto the river itself, onto the surface of the river, onto what they call the gantry and so forth. And here you see elements of the project, which was really a dream come true, you know, to be able to work at that scale. I mean, the Public Art Fund, there it is on the water, you know, this was like the big dream ever of my life, was to be able to project directly onto the surface of the Hudson River and use it as a kind of liquid organic.
Is that difficult? That must be difficult to do, yes?
It's difficult to get the projector there, but because of the silt in the water, it wasn't so difficult. And I kind of knew that from, God forbid, swimming in it back in the 60s, if you can believe that. Like now, the research I've done since then, I realized that it was not a good idea. But maybe that my immune system did well because of it. But
still alive.
so, you know, what I did was like kind of with that piece, and this is something you brought up before, this kind of notion of creativity and getting people watching this to make things. You know, this is one of the things I worked on with the Public Art Fund, and as the motivation behind this piece was to kind of piece together this necklace of creative events, like the fact that the Black Maria film studio was just across the Palisades there. That's Thomas Edison's first, like Hollywood along the Hudson. The fact that, you know, the first artificial intelligence was developed by IBM up along the Hudson. The fact that the very first art movement of the US and the beginning of the preservation of parklands and so forth, the Hudson River School began along there. And to look at the kind of problematics of that, but also, you know, to focus on this whole part of the world as a polyglot where people come together, and the friction there, you know, develops into this wonderful kind of creative engine. And to use the metaphor of the Hudson River, this kind of flow in and out, up and down, and the fact that everything has changed along the Hudson for millions of years except the Hudson itself, you know, and it's kind of reminder of some kind of a baseline, you know,
where does the title come from? What does Tear of Cloud mean?
Tear of the Cloud, or Tear of the Cloud is I wanted to, it's the lake that feeds up in the Adirondacks. It feeds the Hudson River, and it's the origin of it. So everything starts up there, and I kind of changed it just a little bit to refer to kind of digital space, you know, because a lot of the histories that I play with in there are kind of coupled with what's happening here, you know, like kind of taking Grandmaster Flash, his notion of appropriation and sampling, and connecting it to Joseph Cornell, who did the first appropriated piece of film work, you know, and kind of collapsing these things together. And they worked, you know, over time very far apart, but distance-wise, they, you know, Grandmaster is still with us doing things, great things, but Joseph, they were close on the line of the Hudson.
Well, that's your histories that you create are so important, and for people to go through and really understand that these aren't just these gorgeous spectacles, but that each piece has a narrative thread or historical thread. And we can just briefly, this is a huge project some people might have seen called Imponderable, that was at MoMA before Tear of Cloud, and is why we brought in the grandparents.
Yeah, it's
family history, which is very amazing.
Thank you, Thyrza. This is I'll try to keep it quick here because I know we're running out of time, but this project started also with my friend Tom Nichols, who is working with Bard CCS, and everybody probably gets up the Hudson to that area and goes to see the shows there. But Tom also works with the Luma Foundation, Maya Hoffman in Aurel and Zurich and so forth. And he and Beatrix Roof and Hans Ulrich Obrich and the team there at Luma invited me to do a project related to this kind of archive that came out of the timeline we were talking about. I started working on in the late 90s. And so I had this kind of massive, you know, thousands of objects, you know, photographs, old books, graphics, and so forth, and a few sculptural objects, and that I collected over the years. And one group of those related to this kind of intersection between, you know, writers, mystics, sort of psychic detectives, and belief systems. So you had like Arthur Conan Doyle, who was a detective writer, and my grandfather was a detective writer, and they knew each other and loved each other. My grandfather was a magician, and he knew Harry Houdini. Harry Houdini had been friends with Arthur Conan Doyle, but they had a falling out. My grandmother was friends with all of them. And Marjorie Crandon, who was the psychic in Boston, and whose seance outfit you see hanging in the display there, was somebody who I think of as a kind of, you know, kind of folk surrealist, who was a very interesting character who did kind of psychic seances in the 20s. And so what it was a true story that's almost unbelievable. And the way that we set it up was that, you know, kind of the Luma Foundation published a big fat book called Imponderable of the Archive. And then they said, well, maybe you should make an artwork related to the archive. And the artwork that I decided to make was a feature film, which was projected in a 5D version with a 3D Pepper's Ghost and other things that happen in the theater, wind and movement and so forth.
Smell and the 5D means.
Yeah, and so then when it came to, you know, we had lectures, you know, like, anyway, when it came to showing it at MoMA, we reconfigured it so that there was a section for each of the characters that I mentioned who appear in the film, in the story, so that you have this idea of, well, when you see the vaginal ectoplasm in the film, then you can come out and see that I didn't make it up, that it was actually a feature of Marjorie Crandon's seances, you know. And so there's this kind of reflection back and forth of believability and belief systems. And
if you could go back a few slides just so we have an image of the actual, before the one before this.
Of the film itself.
Yeah. So this is what the film looks like. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah. So
yeah.
it has a, you know, you can see the relationship to the earlier stuff, but it had this kind of transparency to it, because the whole thing was done in a series of kind of transparent layers. And
wow, I don't know how you do all this. This is an awful lot.
With help from other people, wonderful people I've been able to work with through the years, you know.
That's true.
Great actors and performers and computer people and so forth.
Yeah.
And galleries. And
so we can end with what's up right now, images of the magical variations that are up with
Lehman Mofin Gallery. You know, in the COVID, everybody, as you know, has been shifting to try to see how we can share culture with one another. And, you know, we're not strangers to the internet by any stretch of the imagination in terms of working with try to make art on it and so forth. But it's great to see how galleries are working on that now. So
so these are back to painting, right? Painting.
Yeah, it's painting, drawing, and digital screens embedded in the paintings very directly. You know, I used a kind of, they're mostly circles kind of punched in. I think maybe I was almost thinking of my old friend Baldassare, you know, how he would just punch things with how the power of this kind of portal. And so this has a kind of connection. The one there with the guy in the dress is a Luddite, and which the Luddites tended to do when they went out with their hammers to destroy technology. They were very interested in turning the world upside down and kind of
war kind of thing. Funny.
And the other piece is a kind of obvious headless horseman reference, connecting to the moon hoax, you know. So they're all kind of connected to the recent research I've been doing about kind of magical thinking and the internet, and how the bots sort of spread information, and how these kind of erroneous situations evolve. So the Luddite piece depicts the burning of a 5G tower. And so there's this whole kind of new mythology that evolved around the G5 towers, and people were going out and destroying them because they thought they were destroying the oxygen in your blood and maybe spreading COVID, and somehow also connecting to Bill Gates and the chips that are eventually going to be put into us through the vaccines and so forth. So I was looking at this kind of totally insane theories and how they spread in technology, and kind of relating that to the Luddites' mentalities, and also.
Well, I just want to interrupt for a moment, because it goes back to like your early stuff in the late 80s. You're already dealing with conspiracy theories and technology, and working like with Philip K. Dick. So at that point, you're kind of a futurist, or you're, you know, thinking about it. Now it's kind of terrifying. You're a documentarian, right? You're documenting. It's like this is like in our worst nightmares, right? Would you think these things?
It's frightening how many of them there are, and how prominent they are, and, you know, the queue and so forth. And I'll put up some signs here but seriously, yeah, that there's actually, you know, candidates and government officials who believe in these kind of theories. And, you know, it's a sad thing when a culture is so disenfranchised that they have to reject science to make themselves feel empowered in one way or another. And I really don't believe that science is our enemy, you know, that science is an ally, and that we need to be able to use this energy that exists now in the culture of resistance to kind of reinvigorate the creative impulse, not in a way that's destructive, because, you know, the fact that people kind of love these outsider mythologies that are occurring, there's a wonderful political aspect to it, you know, where people are just, I will not think in the prescribed way. But when it ends up being destructive and further nullifying people, that's a problem. So I think that, you know, it's up to us artists to make the new mythologies that are going to propel people forward, and to invigorate people and bring them back into a power position rather than a nullification, you know. So my warning is that, you know, when these things come along, they may be really, they may seem radical at the time, but they actually are a form of, you know, a psyop, if you want to put it that way, which is set up as a kind of mind control nullification, really.
What a beautiful way to end, Tony. That was fantastic. So thank you for us kind of flying through your history. There's still so much more, but now I'll turn it back to Louis, because we can have a few minutes of questions and stuff. So
okay, thanks, Thyrza.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tony and Thyrza,
for getting us through it. I can't believe you got through it all.
Thank you both. So our first question comes from Scott Lerner, and I am going to ask you to unmute right now, Scott.
Hey, can you hear me?
Can you hear us? Yes.
Hey, big fan, Tony. So as someone about to head off to art school, this is somewhat of a personal question, but it seems like you had a really incredible confluence of artists when you were at Cal Arts. I was curious if you could elaborate on some of your more formative experiences at Cal Arts.
The performance experiences at Cal Arts? Well,
more formative, rather.
Formative, sorry. Oh, sure. I mean, I've talked about it quite a bit over the years, but I kind of never tire of it, you know, because it was a great, you know, I really lucked out. My friend, I was at Rockland Community College for my last year of high school, which is a wonderful 2-year school up in Suffern, New York, and great faculty members there. And because it's so close to New York. And it was a big deal for me to, you know, study with some real artists there. And when I was just in high school. And so I met a wonderful guy by the name of Cora Rafos, who's a great painter and old friend, a professor of mine there. And he said, you know, you got to go to California, go to Cal Arts. And I was like, no, I really want to go to RISD or whatever, somewhere. And one thing led to another. And I ended up going to Cal Arts, which was quite a mystery, what it was going to be like. But, you know, I came with a lot of preconceptions, and I've taught for many years at different wonderful places around, you know, that have invited me through the years to work with students. And you know, I've come to really, having gone through it myself and work with young people, I have a great respect for what happens when people go into that space of art school, you know, because you have these preconceptions that you walk in the door with, but they have to change unless you're a very special person, which I don't know if there's someone that special. You've got to sort of alter your perspective kind of radically, you know, and I'm not so sure regular college is like that, you know. So what's asked of artists when they go to art school, it's a very sensitive situation, at least it was for me and a lot of my friends, and I noticed a lot of people left different schools and things like that. So but a wonderful adventure at Cal Arts, just great people, you know. Erica Beckman was there, Ashley Bickerton, just great cast of characters. And Susan Rothenberg was there, Jonathan Borofsky was there, Laurie Anderson, who I mentioned before, Julia Hayward was there teaching as well. And, you know, even John Cage, of all people, was there. So I got to kind of listen to him and hang out with John Cage. So it was a great experience for me, but very intense, you know, very intense, trying to alter all the preconceptions you have about art for better or worse.
All right, thank you.
Are you in art school?
Tony and Scott.
Yeah, I'm heading off to RISD for an MFA very shortly.
Excellent. I just read the Chris Francis book about, you know, Talking Heads, which was great. So a little bit of rock history up there.
I'll take a look.
Good luck. Good luck, man. Let me know how it's going.
Of course. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tony. Our next question comes from our own publisher, Fong. You should be able to unmute now, Fong.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Thyrza. An amazing, intimate conversation. I'm thrilled. Learned so much already. Yes, Tony, I discovered Wilfred a long time ago, but I went to see the show, was it 2017 at Yale University Art Gallery. There was a show of his there, and so I was aware of his work all along, not to mention that he was included in the 15 American show, you know, the whole series at Mo, both the Mo have initiated. It's legendary. But my question is more about Howard Wise, who created the gallery in, I don't know, maybe for 10 years, 1960 to 70. I learned it so much through Irving Sandler's book, because he mentioned about how was being the first 10 years a legendary gallery that show people like George McNeil, Milton Resnick, but then he closed it down, and then he started electronic arts intermix.
Yeah.
And the second half of it, more or less, since my association with Anthology Film Archives and Jonas Media. So my question is that, did you get to know him? Because I know he died in the late 80s, so I never really got to meet him. But
I think I met him once or twice at Electronic Arts Intermix, which was an institution which he began, I believe.
he did.
And, but you know, that generation, the history of New York with that generation was incredible. You mentioned Thomas Wilfred, and let's not forget that he had a big installation that was permanent at MoMA until 1985 or something like that. And it was near the coat room or something, down in a lower section of it. So people might remember that. But to go back to Howard Wise and that group of people who were in New York and kind of pushing forward, you know, like Barbara London, and the great people at the kitchen, you know, Carlotta Schoolman, and you know, there was the kind of a lot of smaller, the history of early experimental technology was broken down. People might not know this, was kind of like they had their own spaces, you know. So Electronic Arts Intermix was made for video art, you know, and the kitchen was made for performance, music, video, film, kind of like that. And you'd go to a museum and they had a little video area, or not so little, or a performance area, or experimental film area, and it was kind of all segmented off in a way. And then it all kind of mixed together eventually, you know, and it's been great to see that. But there's a great history of these kind of experimental, you know, Oswego, upstate New York, the Experimental Television Center. And, you know, I keep mentioning Buffalo and my old friend Tony Conrad, who was connected to Hall Walls, the Squeaky Wheel, and then also, there's a couple other places there. It's, you know, it was a way to, it was a great network for me when I was a young guy, you know, where you'd be able to do an installation in Toronto at A Space, you know, was a great spot that was very supportive to people. And so I'd go up there and just have enough money to get there and kind of build something up, you know, and then have a great experience there. And San Francisco had places, LA.
Yeah, San Francisco Tape Music Center.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, thanks, Tony. Thank you.
Well, great thanks for the opportunity to be here and to say hi to everybody.
Yes, no, it's nice.
I mean, I know that people are having a tough time in the COVID, and you know, it's a really probably been very stressful for the infrastructure for people. So what you are doing, and Thyrza, thanks for the positive energy, and what you're able to keep people connected, I think is important, because who knows how long we're going to be hibernating, and it's good to just know that other people are doing things and that we can get back to something, maybe make things even better when things come back.
Well, I mean, it's very clear to us the day that Trump declared the 15-day quarantine and Monday, March 16, we knew immediately that we're going to prove the opposite. It's not social distancing, which intensifies fear and anxiety among people. We do the opposite. This is socially close.
Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah.
Great.
Back to you, Louis Bloch. Take it away.
Thanks, Vaughn.
Thanks.
Our next question comes from Lisa. I'm going to hand you the microphone, Lisa. Are you there?
Okay. Yeah. Surprise. Hi. Well, first of all, thank you guys. Hi, Tony. I've seen your work for about 1 million years.
Hi.
Actually used to live on Christie Street down from where Lehman Maupin had their gallery for 20 some years. But anyway, here's my question. Not premeditated, popped into my head. You know, I think the last thing you showed were the magical variation paintings. And I had never seen any paintings. And the question that popped into my head is, for so many years, you've worked in all these new mediums, pushing boundaries, doing things. And I think of painting as like one of the hardest things to do because of the long history. And I was curious why you would return to painting after having such a long history.
Good question. Yeah,
and
it's something that I've never really gave up on. And, you know, I think of, you know, two-dimensional graphic space as a kind of basis of anything, you know, screens and, you know, it's a kind of built up history of you know, just basic visual referencing, you know, and so it's something that I began with, and it's kind of been with me, you know. I'm kind of a closet painter, people have said, and I do drawings and different things and paintings and whatever. But since they have video, I don't know what to call them. I like to think of them as screens, but these I overtly titled paintings just because they are.
I should probably share, I was, just by chance, I happened to be in Aspen and hear Jacqueline Humphreys do her talk at the Aspen Museum.
Oh,
and
great.
She made and part of what formulated my question was she made a comment about being a painter. I don't know if I should share this, but I am. She made a comment about being a painter and kind of how difficult it was when you were her partner doing these artworks that were so attention-getting. So that was part of what also formulated.
Well, her work gets a lot of attention. It's just a different kind of attention, you know. And she's got a very interesting kind of connection to technology that we really share, you know, because she's done these recently, these kind of stenciled things. And, you know, in fact, I used her printer to make these paintings that are here. So, you know, we have a dialogue, and it's, you know, it's just the kind of friction that keeps the engine going, you know, because she's done all these. I don't know if you saw her thing in Long Island last summer where she worked with black light, and she's had this kind of interest in, you know, screens forever. And I don't think you can really be a painter today without having an interest in the screen, you know, and digital technology and so forth. So, but painting, you know, they always get the attention, the painters, in the end, you know, people love it. And seriously, my theory about it is that I think as the digital space moves along, people get more and more freaked out by how much time they spend in this and looking at it, and they take a great solace in handmade work, you know, that there's still something left for humans to do. And so that's kind of my reasoning behind, you know, the popularity of painting today. My theory, my pet theory. But are you a painter?
I'm a painter, I'm a sculptor. I did see, I actually happened to have been in Long Island and seen her show. You know, she was using 3D technology. I explore 3D technology. I'm interested in both things that are greatly traditional. That's why, to me, being a unique painter today is one of the hardest things to do. At the same token, I'm interested in making works that could never have been possible before using 3D technologies and different things. But I mean, to be a traditional painter is one of the hardest things that you can do.
Yeah. What's harder?
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks,
yeah.
Tony.
Hey, nice to meet you. Great question. I hope to see your work. Send me an invite, please.
We have one final question.
Get your.
Thanks.
I'll keep you posted for my exhibit. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
We have time for one final question, and it's going to come from Sean Capone. I'm passing the mic over to you now.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes. Welcome.
Great image.
Hi, Tony. First of all, let me just say it was a real pleasure meeting you during the Tears of a Cloud installation. I would often bike up there late in the evening and kind of tracked you down like while you were walking around the piers and chatted about the work. So that was a real pleasure. My question, yeah.
Nice to see you, man.
So my question is this. You clearly have an affection for the history of psychics, illusionists, mystics, and the kind of charlatan and flim-flam side of that world. And artists, you know, especially in the 20th century, have always sought to upend the idea of the consensual hallucination of reality. But while we were having fun with that, you know, as a kind of critical or a philosophical or a, you know, a visual strategy, we're now living in an age where authoritarian political forces have seized control of those strategies as a tool of repression, you know, and control with, you know, these insane conspiracy theories. So my question, I guess, what can we do about that to seize control of that narrative again and use it as a tool of liberation rather than repression? Or, you know, that's a big question. So at the very least, what's your opinion of how that got flipped around?
That's a great question. That's the zillion-dollar question. What can we do, you know? And when the strategy of the left is used against the left, and how is the left being taught to eat itself and so forth, and how do we get back to or move forward to a new paradigm of working together to get things in a better position? You know, I think that right now, you know, maybe what you're implying is that deconstruction is a strategy that maybe doesn't work anymore, and that people need to offer new models. And I think that that's something that a lot of artists have to grapple with. And I think we passed the Rubicon with that. So I think there's going to be a lot more of this kind of psyop situations happening between now and November. And I think the best strategy is to question the origins of everything that comes at us, because there'll be arguments that people think come from the left, but they actually come from the right. and their intention is to split the left so that we lose the election. And so I think what can we do right now is just listen and think, and get to the voting booth and vote for America.
And maybe we need to take the power of absurdity more seriously.
Well, there's a lot to be said for that. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about the politics of pop art and how we get to the point, how do we get to the point where we have like a TV loser in office? You can't imagine that you really can't just turn away from the fact that we watch television and we're on the internet, we're playing video games. That's the way people spend their time. So this whole thing about the breakdown of the willing suspension of disbelief and how people inculcate what they receive through screens, I think could be a little bit more seriously taken, because as you see now, we have a guy who played a good businessman on TV is now in office, and he's, what he is. But I don't know if I'm adding anything new to the dialogue, man. But thanks for the question, and I love your graphic. What is that? It looks like a.
It's a still from my own piece. Hi.
It looks a little bit like, hey, it looks a little bit like my friend Ashley's stuff too, but it's great.
It's a motion
Thanks, Sean.
piece. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, and let's defund the military and convert the military peace dividend into education, the arts, medicine, science, research. I'm all for that.
Absolutely. At the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our lunch with a poem, and we've carried that tradition forward into this digital space and these community events. And today we're thrilled to have the poet May Bersenbrugge to our stage, and I will give a short introduction for her before we begin. May Bersenbrugge is the author of 15 books of poetry. A treatise on stars and a new edition of her 1989 book, Empathy, came out this year from New Directions. She lives in northern New Mexico and New York City. I'm passing the mic over to you, May. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Thank you to the Brooklyn Rail for everything you do. Thank you, Thyrza. Thank you for your work, Tony.
Oh, thank you for.
I remember meeting you once before. I'm going to read from my poem Wonder, which is from my new book, Treatise on Stars. And in that book, I got the idea that I wanted to make one ecosystem, or try to express one ecosystem between the earth and the heavens. So I'm going to read section 1, 2, 4, and 5, the last section. It'll take about eight minutes. One summer night, walking from our house after dinner, stars make the sky almost white. My awe is like blindness. Wonder exchanges for sight. Star by star comprises a multiplicity like thought, but quiet, too dense for any dark planet between. While single stars are a feature of the horizon at dusk, caught at the edge of the net of gems. Transparence hanging on its outer connectedness,
casts occurrence as accretion, filling in, of extravagant, euphoric blooming, then being as spirit and in matter is known, here to there. I go home and tell my children to come out and look. The souls of my two children fly up like little birds into branches of the Milky Way, chatting with each other, naming constellations, comparing crystals and fire. They exclaim at similarities between what they see in the sky and on our land. So by wonder, they strengthen correspondence between sky and home. Earth is made from this alchemy of all children, human and animal, combined with our deep gratitude. I see his dark shape moving and shifting against night's screen of stars. My little girl reaches for his lighted silhouette. Human beings are thought upward and flown through by bright birds. We believe stars are spirits of very high frequency. We feel proud our animals come from stars so dense in meaning, close to sacrament. We describe time passing in stories about animals. Star movement is named for the seasonal migrations of deer, wolf, hummingbird, dolphin, and as animals, stars still walk among us. Our snake Olivia, for example, tells me there is no conflict between humans and rain because resource is all around us. A coyote loved night, and he loved to gaze at the stars. I noticed one star in Cassiopeia. I talked to her, and each night she grew brighter and closer, and she came to life here as a corn snake, my friend. She looks like a dancer on tiptoe, stepping around pink star blossoms, surging up after rain. I start up to ask my birds to return home and find our land continuous with a starry sky, mapped as entities who set into motion occurrence here. Place awaits an imprint from this potential, even though starlight arriving now already happened. What happens is a depth of field. Before and after drought, fire, storm, disruption. I move at high speed, but I'm still standing beside my house in the dark. To go there, I find the place on our mesa that correlates to their tree in the sky and leap up. Space stirs as star trilliums emerge through darkness like humus. I ask one blossom to please in the future renew these bonds between sky and my children, so they will always hold light in the minerals of their eyes. Sun on its nightly underground journey weaves a black thread between white days on the cosmic loom, chord or resonance between new experience and meaning. The origin of stars expresses the underlying warp of this fabric. Summer solstice draws a diagonal across my floor, precession, weaving ground of informing spirit. So therefore, life is fundamental to stars. The reverse is well known. That's why I don't use a telescope, star charts, or glasses when I go out. I think of a place, I wait, then fly to my children. When the stargate is raised, there is a narrow door between sky and ground. But when I arrive, I find the sky solid. I can't break through to visit my starbirds and stand there wondering before dawn. Then sky vault lifts. Maybe I can slip through to find the Milky Way and see its blossoms. Then our sun appears in the crack and pushes through to the day. It's so bright, so hot. I step back and cover my eyes. I hear my mother calling.
Thank you so much, Mei Mei. That was beautiful.
Lovely. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Tony and Thyrza. What a wonderful conversation. Thank you to everyone that asked questions and to those in the chat that we couldn't get to. What a wonderful event. We have these every weekday at 1, so please join us next week. On Monday, we'll have a conversation with Xaviera Simmons and Amanda Glubizzi. And I'll now give everyone the ability to turn on their mics to say goodbye. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Thyrza.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mei Mei. That was so
Thank
beautiful,
you,
Mei
Mei
Mei.
Mei.
Thanks,
Thank
Tony.
you.
Thanks,
Amazing poetry.
Thank you.
Really appreciate. Thank you, Thyrza, and thank you, Tony.
Thank
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Jeremy, for helping with tech.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Really
Yes,
great.
thank you to Jeremy and Catherine, our slide and video sharers.
Thank you.
Exactly, Tony.
Hi, Thyrza.
Hey.
Thank you so much, Mei Mei.
Thank you. Bye. That was great.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank
And
you.
everybody.
Thank you. Hi, Susan.
Take care, everybody.